A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes, as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. Today, we're discussing Daniel Greene's Breach of Peace, a novella for our short pour this quarter? I guess I don't know how often we technically do these. It's like roughly every 8 weeks, I think. 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. It's a good one. Definitely get it. It's available within our links down below, as well as on Amazon or Audible or wherever you purchase your books online. Hey there, this is Cross.
God Cop PJ checking in.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You can think of us as your drunk weekly book club.
This isn't a negotiation.
What are you doing?
I never broke the law. I am the law.
What is this?
Choke on that. I clipped like a motherfucker right there, by the way. I'm sorry. Sprinkling a little bit of Judge Dredd for us right there.
Wow. Okay. So
yeah, that was heavy on the clipping.
That was some heavy Judge Dredd there. So today is a short pour from us. It's going to be one of our short pour episodes where we're going to discuss a novella or a short story. Today we're covering Daniel Greene's debut novella, Breach of Peace. All in one go, too. This is the most we've ever read in one shot for the podcast. Technically, it's like 140 pages. It's a small, like, kind of chapbook, though, so it feels like it's probably closer to 100-ish pages. But yeah, it's gonna be a fun time.
I don't have references to page numbers, so you guys get to look forward to that. I get to vaguely talk about when things happen because all I have is the audiobook. This book just came out, a couple weeks ago, if that?
Technically the end of March, so it's been maybe 2 weeks, and a lot of pre-orders are just getting them within the last week or so, week and a half, which is exactly the case I was in. I got it maybe 9 days ago.
Okay, so definitely a little bit of a different situation here. It was about a 3-hour listen, I think.
Yeah.
I want to say. Yeah. I listened to it a couple times, once at regular speed and once at 1.5 speed. So I think it was about 2 hours on 1.5 speed, but I don't remember the first one. So 3 hours makes sense.
But first, let's talk about what we're drinking.
Oh, I've got what's called a Vanilla Daisy. So it is 2 inches. Wow. 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of lemon juice, 1 ounce of simple syrup, 2 drops of vanilla extract, all that shaken together and then poured into a rocks glass, drizzled with grenadine and garnished with maraschino cherries. It's delicious. It tastes like cherry vanilla. And
wow.
I don't know. I really like it. I'm going to make more of them. So to follow that up, I got some mail. I got some mail that contains some beer.
You got beer mail?
Government. I didn't say that. So I got some beer from a place called Burnham Brewing in Indiana. What's technically Michigan City, Indiana. It's called Hipster Juice Bag, which is a triple dry hopped East Coast style New England IPA. And it is delicious. And the can art makes it look like a Capri Sun. So, I'm happy with it.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds pretty good. I am having an interesting cocktail. It's good. It's tasty. I would actually definitely recommend it. I feel like I'm doing a lot of preamble here. I'm currently, for a little bit of background, we typically record one time a week. This week, we're technically recording 2 times, right? 3? Oh, shit. Yeah, within 7 days, we're recording 3 times. And I only have...
Within 4 days.
5 days. 4 days, yeah. So we're going to cover a lot in a very short amount of time on our side of things. So for me, I do slow carb as a diet at the moment, in turn, like kicking in exercise and routine and other things like that. And so I can only cheat in theory 1 day a week. So I've actually got, I don't have a beer as a backup. I have a wine as a backup that we'll talk in a second, but that also impacts my cocktail choice today. It won't in the other 2 episodes. That'll be fine. But today, I'm drinking something that's a little bit different. There's no sugar in it, which is great. Well, there's very small residual sugar, I should say. So what it is a twist on what they call like the paleo margarita, except for it's with vodka instead. So I don't know what the fuck you'd call this. Basically, it's very easy. It's 2 ounces of vodka, 1 juiced lime, and 4 ounces of lime bubbly. It's very straightforward. It tastes good. It's effectively, because it's seltzer and it's just lime flavored seltzer, it's kind of a vodka water with lime. Yeah. But
it's essentially what you've done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It tastes good though. I mean, I'm not upset. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
But it is a full lime, so that's what's really giving kind of the backbone of the flavor here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then first on the podcast, I know that we've had wine floats and things, but we've never actually had wine on the podcast. I'm having a 2017 Robert Mondavi Sonoma Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. Very good, very dry. I come from a family of, I'll be frank, winos. And
yes, he does.
We drink a lot of wine. The Ironman that I completed was, in fact, also in wine country, and that was intentional so that we could go hang out afterwards in Napa Valley.
And I got to take along on that. It was a fucking blast.
PJ did go on that trip, which was great for him. He was drunk while I was racing. Good time for him. Really, really long day for me.
We went to a whole bunch of wineries and a whole bunch of just places in general around the area. And I'm pretty positive I got drunk and sober 3 different times that day while you were racing.
Yeah. Ran for exercising for 16 hours in a day is certainly
I was exhausted, man.
I hate you. Yeah. Anyway, the wine is super great. It's like I said, Robert Mondavi 2017 Capsov, delicious. It's like a $25 bottle of wine, $30 bottle of wine, 25 on sale. Highly recommend. Solid, good tasting notes, cherry, oak, delicious. We haven't had to talk about wine on the podcast at all, but grapes, yes. It is grape juice. We love a grape juice. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tim Ferriss, for allowing me to have 2 glasses of wine a night. It allows for me to do the podcast.
Oh, almighty Tim Ferriss.
Almighty Tim Ferriss. Bow to the Tim Ferriss. So with that, let's get into the novella.
All right.
So the first thing that I want to do here is actually, I don't know if you know that much about Mr. Daniel Greene.
I don't.
So I actually want to read you about the author.
We follow him on Twitter. That's what I know about it.
We do. There's quite a number of nice things about Daniel Greene, but I'm going to read about the author out of the back of the book here so that you get some background. Daniel Greene is a fantasy YouTuber, entertainer, and with the publication of this book, author. He is known for his video reviews of various science fiction and fantasy works and love of the Wheel of Time. You may know him by his moniker, the Disheveled Goblin. You can find him posting videos to YouTube Monday through Friday. All you have to do is search his name.
The Disheveled Goblin.
He goes by the Disheveled Goblin.
That's so good.
He's about our age, and he is so fucking funny. That's part of what he does is he just like accumulates a lot of the like fantasy and science fiction news and kind of pulls it all together. He recently read the first 3 books in the Red Rising Trilogy and is beginning to read Iron Gold.
Nice.
Yeah. So it all works out fairly well. Dude's really cool. 300,000 YouTube subscribers ish, very close to that number. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's it. So we're gonna talk about a first time author today, which is interesting. We have talked about a first time author before, but not one that's self published. I think that it's also important to maybe talk about the sort of. There's nothing disparaging, of course, about being self published or anything like that. It gets a lot more of a negative connotation than it deserves for a number of reasons. But I think that my general feeling about this book is that it was good, and I'm actually interested in the next book. See where it goes.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. I think I have a little bit of a different experience having only listened to it, which I really enjoyed sort of the cadence that I had gotten into with the Red Rising series of reading it and then listening to it as sort of a bolster to what I had like experienced. So it was a little bit frustrating not being able to like jump back and see like, oh, what is this referencing? What did I miss? Where am I like getting caught up here? And I would have to go through and like re-listen to chunks at a time. But that has nothing to do with him. That's just the fact that when I found out we were doing this, I did not take the initiative to order the book, and eventually had to resort to getting the audiobook because I wouldn't get the book in time. So it's my fault.
Yeah. I mean, it couldn't be 2 days shipped to you, which is nuts because he's had such a backlog actually with the number of orders for the book, which is great for, a self-published author to see this kind of, initial success and everything else. And I'm happy for him, especially being so bold and brave to bold and brave, like as a fellow, he's actually a writer now. I can say he's a writer. As a wannabe writer, just putting your shit out there is crazy to me still. Yeah. I've had a couple of articles published, but not not a book.
Well, you're bad. That's all I have
Thanks.
to say. No.
Appreciate
I've read drafts of your stories and they are really good. And I'm excited to see when those get published, but
thank you. That's
they haven't been.
Talk about.
So we'll talk about somebody who has actually had something published.
Oh, yes. Let's start with the summary. Do you mind reading the summary that we have here from Goodreads / Amazon / wherever else?
I would. Let me once again preface this with I'm bad at reading things out loud. So.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you were going to use your Judge Dredd voice.
Oh, I could. Citizen. No. When an imperial family is found butchered, officers of God are called to investigate. Evidence points to a rebel group trying to stab fear into the very heart of the empire. Inspector Kled begins a harrowing hunt for those responsible, but when a larger conspiracy comes to light, she struggles to trust even the officers around her.
Pretty good summary.
Yeah, that is definitely a good summary. One that gives you nothing as far as like spoilers in the book goes, which I think is very important for a short book like this. You get the gist of what's going on, but it doesn't ruin anything. Like I've definitely been ruined by summaries before. So
for sure.
Good to have that.
Definitely. Yeah. It's definitely a good summary, and it's hard to blurb a book, I think, to like condense that down and to write something that's concise that way. So dig it. So let's talk about the setting a little bit. Let's talk about some of the technology and kind of set the groundwork here. I think what's interesting, and we've talked about this off air, but this book is world building with a mystery tucked inside, mostly.
That's definitely how it feels, at least. It feels more world building than anything, hidden behind sort of a cop procedural mystery. Not procedural. That's the wrong term for it, but like detective novel. I guess that's just detective novel's the right way to put it. Mystery novel. So, but it did a very good job of tucking in all of those nuggets of information about the world around them. And you got to sort of see a lot of the inner workings of the society itself from the point of view of somebody who's fairly high ranking in it, though not pivotal to the function of the government, I guess. It seemed like a very good, high up enough to have an understanding of things, but not high enough where they feel too important to this kind of story. So I don't know the right way. I didn't have this written out ahead of time, so I'm maybe stumbling a little bit more than I'd like to, but it felt well decided to have somebody in this inspector position being the lead of this sort of world building book. Yeah.
I think to kind of like put a bow on top of what you're saying, especially when you start inside of something that's self-described as fantasy to whatever degree, you kind of expect to be placed in the like feet of a chosen one or a main character who's going to make it for a long time. And I think a like secret strength of this novel is that it doesn't lean into that trope at all. It completely leans out of it and really builds the world in a completely unique way. I can't think of given this is a novella, of course, but I can't think of another fantasy story that starts with such a different perspective. And I'm only expecting, of course, over the next 2 novellas for that perspective to change kind of each time a little bit and give us give us the other perspectives that he's kind of promised. It is interesting to start, though, on the high side of the perspective, looking down at everyone else in kind of very literally, actually, a holier than thou sense of authority. And I think that's actually an interesting thing that Clid grapples with a little bit over the story. There's a couple of specific moments that we'll get into a little bit later. Not grapples with even, but recognizes. And we grapple with it, I think. We're like, oh, are we rooting maybe for not good guys? Like,
are we the baddies?
They're not really good guys. Yeah, right. It kind of is that. And it's like, oh, well, if we're the baddies, there are some worsies out there. It's the way that this story goes.
Yeah, a little bit. Just kind of backing up a little bit. You mentioned it self-described as a fantasy novel, and it didn't read that way to me at all. I get that there are fantasy elements and there are little descriptions here and there of the fantasy components of this world, but for the most part, this felt almost dystopian in the way that it was presented. Almost like a dystopian mystery. It's pre-industrial revolution, or maybe in the midst of the industrial revolution, I'd probably say.
Right. Or just post. I'd probably call it industrial. It's like right on that edge.
Yeah. But that said, that time frame doesn't seem to matter that much. There's a couple elements here and there, specifically with the technology and the guns and stuff, like guns that don't have to be packed and like fired shot by shot, is like this cutting edge technology. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of leaning on the technology of the time as far as the storytelling goes. You could tell me that it's, I don't know, 1980s, and I'd believe it for the most part.
That's interesting. I think you're pretty much on it. I don't think that there's anything else that separates it enough. I think really the gun is kind of the number one thing, outside of them also not having technology that we know we have, right? Like, we know that they're not calling each other. We know that they're not writing emails to each other. They have to meet up at places and kind of pre-plan.
Exactly. And you have to run 16 blocks to the precinct to tell the chief what's going on.
Yeah, right. Right.
There are things like that, but any pre-modern era, I think, would be applicable here for the most part.
Extracted from the text a little bit, it's worth noting that Daniel, I think, is number one outside of the Wheel of Time, which is a fantasy series. His number one author preferred story is Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle. So it makes sense that, of course, the first thing that he writes is kind of a fantasy fiction mystery novel. So yeah. I think it kind of blends some of those elements together and hints at something larger, but you're right. It doesn't quite hit full fantastical.
And I think it's first of all intentional, and second of all, well done in that respect, in that there's elements there that you're gaining knowledge on, and you can kind of glean some information about what's going on in the world in a way that's subtle enough that it's not taking away from the story being told. Like it felt like, with a little bit of convergence towards the end and towards the climax, it felt mostly separate from the fantasy side of the world.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that really, like you said, I think really that last section is where, well, the last like 2-ish chapters is where you really start to get some of the fantastic elements. And of course, when you go back, reread it, some of that becomes more apparent, like any mystery does, right? But
there's the intro with the Lord of the Estate turning into some demonic abomination. But
you know what's crazy? I actually didn't. I've read this now 3 times. Somehow, I didn't actually connect that it was Lord Pruitt that was the murderer. I thought that there was actually another murderer that was secretly out there still. But my brain also was like, I don't need the answer to the question of who the murderer is, because I'm intrigued by whatever happened to Lord Pruitt.
Yeah.
You putting that in my note, putting that in the notes, actually made me go, oh fuck, how did I miss that?
Well, because he's technically the murderer, but he's not necessarily the guilty party, if that makes sense. Somebody turned him into that thing, and he wreaked havoc on his own family, but presumably not by his own free will.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I think maybe what we should do is we should start talking about the chapters as we go through them.
Yeah.
I want to preface this kind of by talking about my thought of this book on the whole. What's really interesting is that I think that the beginning of the book is the worst part of the entire book. And that's not actually to say that the dark descriptions and all of the sort of gore are poorly described. I think that's the strongest part of the first section. I see. I've read and like listened to a little bit of criticism that kind of lays into some of the description being negative. It's very Clive Barker. It's very Stephen King, but it's visceral. It's well described. It's horrifying, but I almost don't have a sense of character yet. And so just being thrust into a horrifying situation, I'm trying to learn the characters at the same time as I'm absorbing this horrible information. And it didn't quite work. The second chapter worked a lot better.
I think part of the problem is you're approaching a horrific scene through the eyes of a cold, calculated, calloused woman who's been working as an investigator for her entire career.
Yeah.
So she's not reacting emotionally. Nobody really is, because that's the nature of their job.
Compare this to Seven. Right? The first scene, I didn't think about this until right now when we're talking about it. But if we think about Seven, the first couple of scenes in Seven, Brad Pitt has been running the murder beat, quote, in other places, but it's not like the city that he's in with Morgan Freeman. Right? And this case in particular is so brutal that he's turning away from the scenes. And so the audience is relating to him reacting negatively, even though Morgan Freeman, the veteran, is standing there kind of semi-stoically and being able to look onward with experience. I think that is a simple enough comparison where it's like this was kind of missing that.
You got a little bit of it with some of the like was it the sergeant that like was vomiting in the corner?
Shits. God, that was one of the funniest jokes. Truly, Daniel was funny when he was funny. Like when he made a joke, I thought it was good.
Oh,
when Chapman calls him shits, I just lost it.
I really enjoyed the point of view of Chapman, which wasn't
for sure.
There wasn't enough of it. I feel like I wish.
Agreed.
I wish there was more, especially because of the nature of how the story unfolds later. Mm-hmm. But that I felt like was some of the strongest, like character-driven, emotional writing. I guess.
Totally.
Not necessarily emotional, but like internal monologue writing. The feelings of Chapman feel so much stronger than the feelings of Clyd.
I would definitely agree with that. I was more connected with, and we're both men, right? So naturally,
that's
perspective,
true.
Sure,
good point.
But also, I felt like that perspective felt a little bit more grounded, and the character felt a little bit more direct and real. Not that Clyd didn't. Clyd was actually an interesting, capable woman inside of a good relationship with some great dynamics between her and Samuel. But it definitely had. It just felt like there was like a knob that needed to be turned up. And I couldn't pick out what knob it is if I wanted to.
Interaction with normal people. Clyd had very little interaction and very little dialogue with anybody that wasn't either the chief or another inspector.
Which is also why I ended up liking her a lot more at the end.
Yeah, but because the conversations with the quote unquote normal officers were so much richer, I felt like.
Yeah.
And so much more natural. Because it was channeling a normal person that they're talking to, as opposed to these sort of elite investigative detectives that all kind of have this stoic air about them.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And I think that's also why Chapman was so relatable, right? Is because you kind of got some of his internal panic when he like forgot shit's his name among other different moments, right? When what was his actual lieutenant that hung around with him the whole time and was a
the sergeant
character.
Started with an R. So he has these real connections, even though that like he admits that he doesn't connect with them, and they tell him that they don't connect with him on a personal level. But he has Rollins. Yes.
Yep.
They connect with him in a negative way for the most part, but it's a real way. Like, you really get that he is this arrogant, aloof guy who's maybe a little bit too on his high horse. But at the same time, when they're describing that perception of him, you see how he's just kind of forgetful about matters that aren't directly important to what he's trying to solve. Like, he's just focused on things. And it's not that he's trying to be maliciously, like, unattentive to the officers. He's got more important things on his mind, and he feels bad about that in hindsight and in retrospect, but it's what makes him good at his job.
Right.
Like that was such a real interaction that felt really, really good. And I wish we had more of that.
I definitely agree. I think that also what adds to that is, so for me, I think that is a very relatable perspective because both you and I behave like that. And
to each other sometimes.
Other friends, like I was going to say, like 50% of our friend group is like that, where we're very confrontational on the front end. We know that we're right about something, and then like we'll reflect on it later and be like, "Shit, that was a bad call." Yeah, I was a dick, which is exactly how Chapman reacts. And so I definitely got some solid moments, solid vibes from that. Vibes? Why the fuck did I say vibes? Anyway,
solid. It felt vibes. Vibing on
solid
Chapman.
Vibes. Solid vibes on Chapman, which I thought was interesting, which also made the later revelation a lot better. And I think that's why I like that so much, is that when it hits in chapter 4, when it's revealed that he's a rebel and everything else, like, and that he actually is against everything that our primary POV is, I was like, oh shit, I was expecting to like hop back into his perspective here at some point, and we're not going to. Fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that he's against everything that she stands for.
No.
I think
he's interesting because he's conflicted.
He's very conflicted in that it seems like he really enjoys truth seeking and mystery solving. And despite there being a ministry of truth, he kind of seems to see through the bullshit of the government that he works for. So I think he comes at it in a very morally righteous way, in that he is bringing people to justice that deserve it, but he's also not blindly following what he's told in the official statements of the government.
No, it's totally. So it's like he treats his entire life and his morality as he's facing outwards, like everything is a puzzle box to be solved. And Chapman has the capability to solve them all. And so when he looks at the puzzle box of the murder, he can piece together the different pieces and components that would go into the murder. When he looks to the government and society, he can piece together the solution. And that's why he's a rebel, is because he knows that in reality, the society for him, the empire for him, is very negative. And so he understands and gets the solution. That's why he's on the side of the rebels. And it's as though he already has all of these puzzle boxes figured out before we even land in his perspective. But that still makes a really interesting and compelling character, because he is kind of a know-it-all, but he appears to be right all the time. So a know-it-all who's right all the time can come off as an asshole if they don't also have other negative traits. And he has negative traits that correspond, that he recognizes, which makes him good.
Yeah, I mean, think about what we were just talking about, him forgetting the names of the officers, and finally
Schlitz or whatever. I think it's technically Schlitz or Switz or
I don't remember.
He is.
It's even closer to Shits. It's even closer to Shits than that. But he finally like gives in past his ego and asks his name. And gets a response, and he's so proud of himself and so like astonished that was the right move that he just didn't listen to what the name was. Like it's a flaw of his, but I know I've done that before. I know I've like put my tail between my legs and asked somebody their name or whatever it might be when I should know it, and completely like got into an internal monologue about it and did not at all hear what was said.
You're in a group and you're hoping someone else says it, so you're just looking around and you're like, oh god, that was definitely so relatable inside of the story.
Yeah.
Okay, so we haven't talked about shit dick about the plot, but we have talked a lot about the characters, which is good because I think it sets the scene well. So as I mentioned, the first scene with the crime scene is well described on the crime scene part, but doesn't do enough, I think, didn't do quite enough to grab my interest fully enough. I bought it, so I was going to finish it, of course. This is just kind of my general criticism. This is really my only serious critique in my head, is really kind of the way this first chapter goes versus the way the rest of the book goes. It does feel kind of distant.
But I feel like, again, that's kind of a function of getting to know Cled.
Oh, all the death and gore was so well described. I was definitely horrified of the entire description of the child being hung over the being hung up, and then like having them fail to like cut it down and like not have something that could actually get through the chains, and like that difficulty was interesting and developed the scene well.
So what made me really kind of interested on a second listen through, what made me interested in what's actually going on here, and what makes me question whether or not it was actually Lord Pruitt that did all of this, is the fact that the lady of the house's heart was like removed from her and was placed on the dresser.
Yes.
So that tells me there's something more intelligent here than just animalistic rage. And it makes me wonder if it was, say, the Anointed that came in, killed everybody.
I think so, with the people who died in their sleep, not with the others. Or it was one of the other people that were within the
boy that got hung up and like strung up.
That had to be the Anointed.
And the heart on the table, and I can't remember the girl. Were there two girls? I think there were two girls.
Two girls.
They seem more haphazard.
There was the girl that jumped off, the teenage girl who jumped off the balcony and broke both of her ankles when she landed.
Yep.
And then kind of like tried to shamble away and died there. And that to me felt the most likely to be, now that I'm reflecting back on this with the information that Lord Pruitt was in the basement. Oh, man, I still question whether or not it was Lord Pruitt that actually went back and did any of these. Now that we're reflecting on this again,
I don't think he actually killed any of them. I think
it was the Anointed.
Yeah, I think it was the Anointed who then, as a means of potentially drawing heat towards whatever's in the basement, turned him into a monster that would have the capability of doing something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because then it effectively creates a mirror between the two of them, because they both have weird, grotesque claws. They don't need the same, obviously. But
nobody would think, hey, we found this fucked up like monster in the basement that has claws and is ferocious and seems like just fucking crazy. I don't think they did it. Like that doesn't track. Like nobody would think that they didn't do it if they were there and seemed crazed. But it seemed more intelligent than that.
So here's a semi-serious question that feeds into this. I'm not a big fan of anime. I've got maybe two that I really like.
I think you and I have at least one of the same ones, which I think we mentioned.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh, we have two of the same ones.
Is the best anime, and maybe even one of the best stories ever written.
So the two I like are Full Metal Alchemist and Boondock Saints, or the Boondocks.
You like the Boondocks, yeah.
Which I would consider
Boondocks
anime, I guess.
Boondocks
maybe,
is pretty good.
Maybe
I haven't dug into it enough, which I think we've talked about before. I think
we have talked about it on
we haven't
the show
on the
before.
podcast, I don't think, at all.
We did.
We did.
A couple episodes ago.
Episode. Really?
Nope. I would just listen to it. I think it's episode 9 of Morningstar.
Oh my God. Okay.
You brought it up.
My bad. Did I?
Yeah.
However, what I wanted to talk about, Full Metal Alchemist, to me, a lot of these creatures, the entire setting, a lot of everything gives me those vibes. When I think about the investigations, when I think about the investigators, and when I think about the time frame, I totally, in my head, I was like, I am in Central City. And I am there. And not like a perfect clone, especially the like sort of claws that the Anointed has at the end, and the way that the beasts are kind of described gives me the homunculus from Full Metal Alchemist, and Envy. I think it's Envy. Maybe it's Lust. From FMA. Okay. With like the stretchy hand needles thing. Anyway, that's all I could think about when I was reading.
It's been years since I've watched it, so I don't know.
That's okay.
I couldn't speak to it that well.
But those, I mean, as mentioned, the other one that I like is I like Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball, like the franchise.
Yeah, that's fair.
But that might just be childhood fandom. Man, As mentioned, though, post our anime conversation, the deaths are brutal. These are the moments, I think, where the fantasy is elicited, but not fully shown because we don't actually see these things happen, right? We only get context that this even could be a fantasy murdering later, much later.
They approach it as though they don't have an inclination that this is something non-human attacking these people. Like they assume it's just a really fucking brutal murder of human on human action, which I think makes it more powerful because if they had some sort of inclination that this was a monster of some kind, it would make the scene a little bit less gruesome and a little bit less brutal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Like, at the very least, it would give it an overtone of like, oh, this is what we expect raptors to do. So because we know that raptors do this.
Yeah, exactly. Approaching it as if they have no idea it's anything other than human undercuts the fantasy part of it if they know that these creatures exist, or just makes the introduction stronger for the sake of making it stronger, which is fine too.
Yeah, there are a lot of like questions raised, posed, world built. I think something that's interesting is we get no description of if this is in fact a fantasy story. We get no description of anything outside of the Empire. Really,
it doesn't feel
that like chicken town, and so the town where Samuel's at first, and coming back and like leaves his like student detective or investigator.
I'm curious about that too. I don't necessarily believe it, but you know
that he left them
probably.
There?
No, I don't necessarily believe that was actually what happened. It felt like a kind of made up story, but we'll never know because that bitch is dead.
Yeah. We can talk a little bit more about the kid a little bit later. I guess like my point being though, you're entirely correct because they didn't posit that it could be anything else. We don't get a picture that it could be anything but human until we go to the basement and we come to a realization that there's something that is more than human or less than human out there that is a mutation. We don't figure out that it's a mutation until much later, but we do understand that it is Lord Pruitt to some degree.
Definitely seems like a demon, which they bring up.
Nightmare
and
fuel.
apparently they exist or existed in the realm at one point.
Yeah,
but
it's definitely. It's well described. Again, I don't think the weakness of this piece or any weakness of this piece could be described as his weakness is not description inside of this. It's also not fully like characterization as though we know who they are. It's almost relatability, and I hate that. I hate the idea that a character needs to be relatable because not all characters are going to be relatable to everyone. So,
no, but a character needs to be relatable if you're going to be seeing through their eyes.
Yeah, that's fairish, I guess.
Or to a certain extent. Yeah. They need something to ground you in them. And that's all I really have to say.
That's fair. So we also get a lot of fantasy world building here. We get the Empire, we get the Ministry of Faith, we later get like the Ministry of Defense, we get the investigators themselves, we get things like the Fist a little bit later. I think it's interesting.
We get God a little bit, the Almighty and God and the Anointed.
The Anointed are also the Chosen.
The Chosen/Anointed. Those are basically all of the fantasy elements mentioned. I'm sure I'm missing one or two. There's the demons. They mentioned that demons have been like defeated from this realm for years, which that conversation came across as oddly dismissive as well. Kind of like
very quick.
Yeah, but kind of like I'm rewatching Game of Thrones right now. So all of the people giving like input that
why is the first question I have, but
well, I don't know. I'm
kidding.
The first handful of seasons are really good. I'm rewatching it. Lay off it. The amount of people that get told and just dismiss the idea that White Walkers are coming, it's nonsensical. Like, yes, they've been gone for a long time, but you've also known from history that they come back. So, like, maybe take it seriously when multiple people tell you that they're coming. But the way that the chief just kind of dismisses the idea that there's a demon in the area and a demon's responsible for all of this reminded me of that sort of mindset of just dismiss it. Like, they've been gone for a long time, so it couldn't possibly be them, even though they've got 3 officers telling him that that's what they saw.
Yeah.
Like, turns out, no, it wasn't a demon, but maybe that was worth investigating a little bit as a chief of police. I don't know.
Well, and the other possibility is that whatever is going on within the Ministry of Defense with the sort of poison that turns people into demons, or the drip, or whatever it is,
it's an injection, right?
It was, well, yes, yeah. But all that I'm saying is maybe that whatever they're injecting them with was in fact a pool that some prehistoric humans drank out of, and then they like reproduced forever or whatever, and were like a negative. We just don't get enough of a picture of whatever the demons were to even infer what this demon is outside of a corrupted person and an experiment from the Empire, which is evil, of course. It is the perspective of the investigators that we have here realizing that the government that they support is evil, I think is probably the strongest point of the entire novel. Like the end, or even the moment inside of, we'll get there. I'm totally skipping ahead.
All right.
It's just one of those things where it's hard to follow this linearly because it's a mystery, and we unpack the mystery. We don't unpack we do unpack the mystery linearly, but reflecting, you kind of build the components.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You just mentioned sort of the description being plentiful. What did you get out of the description of who we later learned to be Lord Pruitt? I took it as almost like a zombie that was a little bit bloated and kind of shredded a little bit, I guess, like a bloated demon zombie.
I got some impressions of, yes, it was definitely bloated, pustulant.
They mentioned that it didn't have lips, so it just had rotting teeth facing out of its face.
Right. Very abomination. For whatever reason, based on the way that it behaved, I also got kind of like the human vampire bat thing going on, where it feels more agile than it should be.
Right, exactly.
And
especially
after it kind of
gave
me bad vibes for some reason.
Spewing shit for longer than it should be because of pressure. I think that's later on, right? The second time they encounter them, where she just keeps shooting it.
Oh, yeah. It's Mr. Daniel Greene, author guy, does action well. Okay, well, that's, again, we talked about this off air. That might be a trouble between the audiobook and the physical book.
I think so.
Physical book has a cadence and pacing that is actually more similar to Blake Crouch than you'd think. Okay. In a way that it's the sentences are very short, and intentionally so.
Which doesn't
come off
read
well in the audiobook.
Yeah. Okay.
I really enjoyed the sort of like Judge Dredd, like this is where this came from, of course, permission that the officers are given, even though they're like clearly this repressive entity inside of society. They are also this like judge, jury, executioner, and they have both this weird respect about them as well as other elements that I find interesting.
Yeah, Judge Dredd, obviously, like I brought him, I channeled him at the beginning of the episode a little bit, but I think it's a good call out here. I think that is a good descriptor of what's going on. But at the same time, all I could think of in a lot of the description of the society itself and the police force and the government as a whole, it felt very reminiscent of Anthem by Ayn Rand. A little bit brainwashy, a little bit of like drips of going against the grain and rebelling and not giving or not believing everything that you're told. But for the most part, everyone in society seems to be on board with the government knows what's right. Everything the government says is true. The police have ultimate authority. Down the line, like there's a lot of examples of towards the end of the book, or towards the middle, I guess, where Clyd and Chapman are in that market and in that bar, and Sam too, and weapons are drawn, and there's this perception of no matter what, the person wearing the police uniform are the ones that's right in the public opinion.
Yeah, the societal contract is very, very heavily skewed towards the officers.
Yeah. So it's like, obviously there's a resistance, and obviously there are people working against the government, but the way everything was described and the way that Clyd seems to interact with her day-to-day life seemed very brainwashed in a way.
Yes. I think that Clyd actually definitely is an example of a brainwash here. I want to roll back to some of the things that you said and kind of work through everything, because I think you did such a good job of describing so many things. Rolling back to Anthem and Ayn Rand. First off, most of their Ayn Rand books, for the most part, are ideological, fine, meh, worth reading when you're 20. Anthem, I think, is the only book that truly stands out as something that is worth it in the long run. The rest of them are interesting, not interesting. They're poorly written. But Anthem.
But I think the ideology is something to be considered in a lot of it.
Yes. All that I'm really getting at is that Anthem actually stands out as a story and kind of the best.
Yeah.
It's easily the best thing that she ever wrote. Easily.
That's fair. Totally fair.
And it's about this long as well.
Oh, it's very short.
It's very short.
I have the audiobook of it. You and I actually share my audiobooks.com account. I have it on there if you want to listen to it. It's like an hour, maybe.
Yeah, it's very short, but in my head, it's probably the only book that I would, of Ayn Rand's, that I'd like actively recommend to people to read for whatever reason. Right. Anyway, moving on. You're right with the comparison to like Anthem's sort of dystopian society and the way that kind of feels, where everyone is really truly just kind of jogging along with the rule of the law as though it's unquestionable. And then we move into kind of what you were saying with the examples of the street vendor and Samuel, the whole like pulling the gun out of Chapman's pocket.
Oh, speaking of the sort of truth above everything, or the government above everything kind of ideal, when they're talking to that street vendor before they go into that bar, since they're wearing civilian clothes, before he realizes that they're inspectors, he says something offhanded about, I think it's smoking. He says something like, I don't care what the Ministry of Health says, smoking's good for you. Look at my teeth.
Yeah. And he smiles.
And just saying that jokingly was apparently legal grounds for public beating.
Right.
Because it went against what was officially said by the Ministry of Health. Mm-hmm. Like, even though it was sarcastic and literally a joke, punchlined by him showing his fucked up, rotten teeth, presumably caused by a lifetime of smoking, him saying that smoking was good for you, even in that context, would have been grounds for literal public beating with no repercussions. Like,
yeah,
that's a little fucked up, man.
More than a little fucked up. I think that's another example. So we've talked about this before. This book world builds beautifully. Yeah. And this is another one of those moments where it's like, that's a simple paragraph that lends itself to both the crazy cruelty of this society, how people still find joy in humor, and then in turn might be repressed when they get the badge flashed back at them, right? Like,
yeah,
there's still those that are rebels, even if they're not, quote, with the rebels. They're, casually microaggressing against society or the empire. Yeah. I keep saying this society because we say that for Red Rising all the time.
Right. I keep saying it too.
My brain.
I do. Yeah. And there's not a super like cemented built-in term.
Well,
it
is the empire, but the empire feels but generic,
it does. But so does society, I suppose.
Yeah. We haven't read enough to have it like ingrained.
Yeah. That said, that sort of retaliation isn't strictly like relegated to the citizens or the normal people of society. There's a point where Clid goes to the chief, brings all the information on Chapman after everything goes down with him, which I know we'll get to it, but this is relevant to the conversation, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit. He threatens to strip both her badge and her fucking citizenship if there's anything like untrue about her statement. So the police have the authority to strip citizenship of people, which is fucking insane.
Yeah, truly talk about like a totalitarian dystopia, like you've said before. It gives, there are all these different lines, all these different moments that give breadth to this larger thing that I honestly like want just more of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
outlandish though.
There's nuggets. There's little nuggets of this society that they're living in, of the dystopian world, and I just want more of it fleshed out. So I'm excited to see where that goes. But that doesn't have a whole lot to do with what's actually going on.
Right. What's actually happening here. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we've kind of talked about this. Chapman, obviously, after Samuel is kind of dismissed from the scene when he steals the weapon from Chapman and kind of indicts him, he gets sort of embarrassed by his wife. You know, actually, we should back up a second. We keep doing this, going forward and then backing up. We talked about this off air, but the moment, it's on page 48 for the book, but when she says, "I love you too," and with that, Clid left the last crime scene of her career. There are two of these different moments in the book, and they're fairly controversial in their own rights. Daniel himself has even talked about them a little bit. What did you think of those two different moments? The one is the "I love you," and the one is they would never see each other again, or something similar.
They shared the last kiss that they'd ever have.
Yes, shared their last kiss. Yeah.
Whatever it was, something like that. Kissed each other for the last time. It felt a little ham-fisted and a little heavy-handed. I didn't like it. I saw through all of it right away, and I'm like, all right, so she's dying before the end of the book. Like, yeah, it gave it away right away for me.
It puts a clock on one of the two of them, right?
No, but we know from who she is, she doesn't seem like the kind of person who would push away from the police force if her partner were to die. She seems like the kind of person that would stoically go about her job as a means of not thinking about it.
I think you actually finally pointed out the piece of information that I was missing is the characterization here. I was going to say this is a very common thing inside of a number of different... You can allude to a character dying like this and having it work. Mm-hmm. You finally... You locked it in for me why people are upset or frustrated about this potentially. You know, it's a thing within Stephen King, within Clive Barker, within a number of my favorite authors, within Michael Crichton. Blake Crouch even does it to a lesser extent, not with the character dying, but with other things. You can paint a moment like this, but the moment also needs to be kind of in line with your characters or group of characters' morality to make it such that it could be an option. Right. It's not an option that she's not going to go to another crime scene. She will continue to do this so long as she is able to.
Right. Exactly.
But that's also why it's believable until the very end when she's actually dead. I think, at the very least. Like when she dies, you're like,
what do you mean it's believable?
Well, I actually thought that it was okay and believable until like she goes and meets with the captain. It seems like she might get sent out. She might survive to the next novella and then gets murdered at the end by the Chosen. Right. Like,
yeah,
it kind of feels like she might make it out and that, in fact, it was all about Samuel dying. It turns out it was about both of them dying. If she would have survived, it would have been okay. I think it still would have been great, though.
I think I can see where that was coming, or like I can see where you're going with that. I didn't get that, right? I didn't feel that. It
might have been too early to be earned.
Yeah, it felt ham-fisted. I don't know if I'm using that term properly in this context, but whatever the applicable parallel to that would be, it wasn't subtle enough to play off like it was intended to play off, in my opinion.
Yeah. So comparatively, though, when Chapman is revealed to be a traitor and a rebel, I was truly shocked. The depth of Chapman is so interesting. And that moment to me, when they're in the bar, I reread it right before the podcast. I re-listened to it right before the podcast. I doubled back on it a number of times. Might have been my favorite part.
Yeah, it was definitely up there in my favorite part. Until having a conversation with you right before we started recording, I still wasn't convinced necessarily that he was truly a rebel, and was considering and pondering on the idea that maybe he was a mole, just kind of an undercover agent, so to speak. But there's enough evidence against that I think it's right to assume that he is more so just a very moral person who is passionate about solving mysteries and solving crime and being the elite force in the law, while also being discontent with the lies told to him through the empire.
He's kind of like neutral good, right? Neutral good? Can you be neutral good? Lawful? So it'd be...
I feel like... there's good, neutral, and evil, and then there's lawful, neutral, and chaotic. So...
Yeah. Good. Neutral good.
Neutral good, I guess. Though an argument could be made... No, yeah, neutral good, I think. I think good. Just good would be his alignment.
Yeah, I think so. He's not true neutral. He's generally serving the betterment of society. Fuck society. Not the empire, but people in general.
Not the society capitalized, but the society
yes.
that he lives in.
Correct.
Lowercase.
Yes. Be that through investigating murders and trying to solve those, and working for, the betterment of the society within the system, which is what he's doing as an investigator, or as a rebel, right? The other half of that, when he's a part or feeding information to the rebellion, it's because he believes that truly that will bring more good than what currently exists. But he also believes he's a weird combination of things. He's like, I'm going to exist within the law and outside the law because I am fuck you character Chapman boy.
Yep. Though as an inspector, he's kind of outside the law to begin with. So,
Very true. He's above the law in the first place, which maybe also gives him mental permission to work with rebels. So I feel like the rest of the book flows pretty quick from here. I feel like we've talked a lot, but there is a lot of the rest of this boils down to incredible action scenes, great moments where Clyd is drugged and sat in a tub, right? Which I think is a great moment on Chapman's part. He runs off to the dock to go investigate to see if he can solve this problem on his own. If he can't solve it on his own, that there's backup coming. The chief doubles up with backup from the MOD if the investigators that are sent can't solve it and the 7th precinct can't figure it out. The MOD will show up. Otherwise, they're gonna have to figure out how to turn on the MOD. Everything goes fucking south. Chapman's turned into a bloated zombie dude. This is a general summary of everything. We'll break it down in a second here, but that's kind of the way most of the story goes until the very end.
Yeah. So there is the point where Clyd mentions that for the first time in her recollection, the chief lies to officers about what's going on. Yeah. I think saying that these rebels may have Ministry of Truth uniforms. Is it Truth?
I thought it was MOD. Maybe it was Truth.
Maybe it's... I can't remember, and I can't look it up because it's audio. He mentions that the rebels may have one of the other ministries' uniforms as a means of potentially...
It's MOD, according to the book.
It is MOD? Okay.
Yeah, it's on page 92.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
As a means of keeping this going, even if they see other governmental agencies, it keeps them going forward. There is that sort of double-edged sword of if they are actually MOD, which they are, then you're damning an entire precinct to going to war with another government agency, which when that agency is the actual military, I don't think they're going to win. But
yeah, there's a chance that they're going to lose. And it's a strong chance.
It's a strong chance, and it's pretty gruesome the way it plays out. I guess not necessarily until the end. They actually handle it pretty well, don't they? Until the Anointed shows up.
Yeah, they're doing okay until the Anointed shows up, and then everything goes so wrong. Just to maybe back up just a tiny bit, we encounter a woman who's injecting Chapman with shit, turning him into one of these bloated zombie dudes, of course. Rollins is around and covering Clyd. Samuel is taking other investigators, and they're kind of flanking around and whatnot. And, I'm so glad that Clyd had the strength, the quick fortitude, and quick wit to put down the woman in the red dress. I'm a little bit both angry and not angry that she didn't shoot Chapman. I mean, Chapman ultimately saves her life because he's hanging on, because he's nursing it like mother's milk, as opposed to, other people who just go insane right away, which is why I think he has the wherewithal or fortitude to not kill her and go for the anointed. But still,
it seemed like a strange decision.
It seemed like a tough decision. And for people that make tough decisions all the time, it didn't quite feel right.
It felt like the wrong choice.
Yeah.
For her.
Yeah. And that's okay. Like, people can make bad choices. Like, they're allowed. I do feel like it was the wrong choice, though. As reflecting on this, it's like, I don't know. You probably should have killed her. Like, what are you doing? Do you have anything else on the warehouse?
Not really. It's a lot of action kind of in the peripheral.
Yeah.
Other than what we've mentioned explicitly.
Like I said earlier, I sped through the back half of this so quick. The front half had kind of a nice...
It really accelerates,
it had a cadence, man. And then, like, it just took off. In the audiobook, it's like the last hour-ish, hour 20-ish, just, like, absolutely launched itself, which was fantastic. And the rest of it was kind of, like, slow and building up, like a, stone rolling downhill and whatnot. I was happy with how it ended and how, like, it all culminated. What's interesting, we talked about this even with Pierce Brown, is it felt like the writing, again, got better as the story went on. And maybe some of that is just, we're examining first time being published, or first time published authors, sort of the way that a book gets better over the course of that first story. And that's because you get more confident with the characters, or the characters are more fleshed out, so you feel like you can use them and you don't need to be so internal, which I think finally happened at the end of this, or nearer to the end of this.
Yeah, it did. But at the same time, it felt like it was rushed to close, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that.
It felt like the last quarter of the book contained more than half of the action of the book. Like, it felt like things moved so much more quickly. And I missed so much more if I were to zone out for 30 seconds than I did at the beginning of the book, which I know I shouldn't be zoning out, but it's just kind of the nature of how the audiobook plays out a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's... Agreed. It's hard to rewind, relive, and understand what that looks like on the page, so I definitely...
It is. That's true. And that I admit that's probably a...
Well, it's just a comparison. I mean... And that's valid. Okay. So I think it's only fair to maybe talk about the ending here. I really appreciated Clyd stumbling out of the entire situation and making it away from the Chosen and all of that. I loved those moments. I loved kind of the sort of weird vocal timbre that I felt like the Chosen had inside of those scenes, the Anointed had. Also, I had the feeling when I was listening to it, I understand that they're one and the same, but also using them interchangeably was a little bit confusing.
Chosen
and the Anointed. And they may be separated in the future, like the Chosen might be different than the Anointed in some way, but that wasn't clear.
Yeah, that's true. We had some like off-air discussions on just titles and the fact that there are multiple for a lot of them. Like the Fist. We talked about the Fist. And there was some confusion on whether or not that was just the military as a whole, or if it's... And I think we determined it's kind of the elite.
It's like the SEALs.
Within the...
Navy. Well, but within the MOD
military
instead. Yeah.
The Ministry of Defense. So it's something that maybe it was a little bit too vague going into it, and maybe pulling too much specific information on the lore of the world without expanding on it a little bit more. And that it seems like a nitpicky thing, and it is something small, did muddy the waters a little bit in reading it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And obviously, like I brought it up in the first place, but it ultimately, there were moments like that were a little bit confusing. And I think that what's really interesting when I think about the way that this book and the way that he's doing this is he's taking in a lot of reader feedback, and it's a very intentional process. It feels as though these first 3 novellas in the end will make one solid book from 3 different POVs, and that's intriguing. That's interesting. But I kind of feel like I wanted it all at once. I kind of feel like I needed it all at once. I am teased enough to go into the next book, but I'm also kind of sitting here with my hands on my hips being like, all right, too much bullshit here that I want to know. So
it's also the sort of foundation of the book, not foundation, the format of the book being primarily first person through the eyes of Clyd, but having those, like, not even chapters, but segments of chapters through the eyes of Chapman. I felt like there wasn't enough of that in order to make that, the way it was written and formatted, makes sense, you know?
Yes.
Like it felt half-cocked in that sense.
Very much in the middle of an edit in the novel that I've written, where I added POV chapters later, and I have to go back and re-add POV chapters to the beginning because I realized that they were important later and I needed them. So now I have to re-flesh out different things from different angles, and it feels like this is too short to, like, demand putting in a torture chapter where Chapman is sitting in the chair, and it also kind of ruins the reveal of what happened to Chapman. But it also kind of feels like there should be something else there with Chapman for it to make sense to have the one third person. This is all third person, not first person, but it's third person limited. So you're only seeing through the eyes via a narrator that's like a camera, right? So we are around Clyd's perspective, but we aren't Clyd.
I think you should write your stories exclusively in second person as a challenge.
No. As a note, though, apparently there are a couple of authors that do that very well. I am not one of them. I would never go, you are walking down a hallway. You turn left. You see a chosen. What do you do? It's very adventure / choose your own adventure.
It's very choose your own adventure, which I hadn't considered that, but that's, yep.
The book ends in such a fucking sad way. The last chapter, I was so excited. The second to last chapter, I was so excited for the Clyd to get out and survive, and the captain for being this really good dude in the end. He was a good dude the whole time, but to be this important element to the entire story, and then to get killed by the Chosen at the end and have all of the other dead folks in the office there, I was upset. I actually was really rooting for Clyd to live, and the moment that the Chosen showed up, I was like, nope, this is Vader showing up to kill all the Padawans, isn't it? That's what this is. There's no way she's making it out again.
Not quite, because they actually wronged
they're not
them.
Children, but yeah, they do wrongs. Okay, yeah, fine.
There's reason why they're being hunted as opposed to just being children. So there is a little bit of a difference there. But
okay, fine.
I thought the most tragic part was I don't know if it's the same, if it's the chapter or the epilogue or what, but the actual end of the book with
the columnist.
Yeah.
That's also fair.
Like,
I just really want Clyd to make it out. I ended up liking Clyd in the end and some of the decisions. The characterization helped really well over the 130 pages. At the beginning, I was like, meh. And then as it went on, she became a great lens to live through. And
I agree with you there.
I wanted that lens to continue. And I was upset when it seems as though she's alive and going to be a zombie bloated thing in the future somewhere. Yeah. She's not dead, but she's guaranteed to be in some other story as something bad.
Yeah. Maybe as like an Easter egg.
Yeah. Or a connecting thread. Yeah. And the final note that the actual book itself ends on with the columnist, I think, was some of the best writing inside of the entire story.
I agree.
It was fantastic. His brother being the man that we met at the brothel with the erection. Hilarious.
Astonishing. I think it was referred to as astonishing.
An astonishing erection, which, you know what? There are those moments where you're like,
those moments.
Am I this way? And you have no control over it, and you don't understand what's going on.
He was in a brothel.
Correct.
So I think that why is it this way is a little bit
he chewed on
easier
some
to
gas
understand.
station horny goat weed. And
There you go. There you go.
God. Anyway, yeah. The whole like telling him and sort of it felt the last epilogue felt very 1984. Right at the last moment, it just hit with very much like, I'm being lied to. I know I'm being lied to. Should I do the right thing or do I do the thing that keeps me alive? And man, that was well written. It was poignant.
Yeah. What does it say? Something along the lines of he sat down and began writing lies.
Yes. Right.
Yep.
Which is, I think, the best line in the entire thing.
I think so too. That was the strongest paragraph, the strongest passage was that from that point of view.
Within our final character's perspective, it was so good. It's worth pointing out too, PJ, in the text that the Chosen's language is bolded.
Is it?
Yes. So it's given the extra layer of, differentiation.
Ragnar.
Right. Well, not quite Ragnar. Ragnar should be bolded and capitalized, but
yeah.
Joch is the name of the columnist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joch.
Yeah. That wraps it up for me for the most part. I think I've got just like maybe one or two residual questions, but do you have anything you want to talk about plot-wise?
No. I think that mostly I think we hit every beat that I wanted to hit. So
I just want to kind of speculate on where you think the story goes. I see three plot threads that are sitting here right now. We know that there are going to be two novellas to kind of round out a trilogy of novellas that are effectively one book. I see the kid that was left with the farmers, that was Samuel's aide. I see the perspective of Joch, and then I see the thread that we talked about with Clid being turned into a demon. What do you think the next one does? Where do you think it starts?
I think I'd like to see it start with the columnist, just as a continuation of this story, and kind of follow that path of the epilogue being the sort of introduction to and the through line for the next story that might be mostly disconnected, but anchors you into knowing that it's the same story.
I think that's a great idea, and I also think that that's where I would start with this. Part of me thinks, because we talked about this in kind of the preamble, but this trilogy is meant to set the groundwork for a larger series. So kind of knowing that in my head, I see Clid as an obvious through line. I see Joch, who we talked about at the end, the columnist, as I think the second book. That's where I would start the second book. Daniel himself has talked about going from a pro-Empire perspective to a neutral to a negative perspective, a rebel perspective throughout these three novellas. So part of me wants to see whatever Joch does in the next novel, and then I think Clid pays off in the third novel somehow as this negative force. But I think
she actually comes back as a character?
I don't think Clid comes back as a character. I just think it becomes a tie-in to kind of round out the thing where like Clid started the story and Clid ends the story. But I do think secretly I have this thought that the kid that was left with the farmers, the new investigator, is going to be the main character of the other series. And he's going to be kind of questioning things because of everything that he's seen go on with Sam and with Clid and with everyone else. Or maybe he's the rebel perspective, he's the negative perspective. But I see him as the most obvious point at scream, that's clearly the character we're going to be following for a long time.
Yeah, that I think I can agree with you there, especially considering he or she is going to come home to their entire precinct dead and gone.
I don't think they come home.
Well,
I don't think they make it home because they're going to get this information.
They'll get news of their entire precinct being slaughtered.
Yeah.
Regardless of if it's upon coming home or if they receive notice some other way. They're going to suddenly be a free agent, so to speak. And depending on how they get the information and what information they receive, it could kick off the perspective of a very interesting, unassociated character, rebel or empire. I think that'd be cool.
Anything else? Any other thoughts on the story? Anything you want to see in the next book? Anything reflecting back?
No. Everything that I thought about it, I think I've covered, so I'm good to call it there.
Well, fantastic. I think we did a really good job covering this. This is obviously our longest short pour, but it's also the most we've ever read and talked about, period, in an episode. So fantastic. So with that, the rest of this week, this is coming out on a Monday. On Thursday, if you're listening to this on time, we've got our episode with HowlerPod, as well as our Iron Gold intro, where we're really just going to be talking through the summary and some other thoughts. It should be interesting, should be a good time. Both of those episodes will be available on Thursday. So that's what we have going on next week, quote, this week. That's what you have to look forward to.
So that's where we will leave you for the week. Please, if you have been sharing us with anybody, or if you have somebody that you think might like us, please share. Just shoot them a line with our information. I think that would help us grow quite a bit. If you are so inclined to review us on any social media, or not social media, don't review us on there. Just interact with us on there. But on Spotify or iTunes or wherever, drop us some stars. We'd like to see it. Social media at Words Whiskey Pod, and website wordsandwhiskey.show. We have a lot of stuff on all there. We've been starting to share memes more often, which has been fun. Cross and I have been giggling about those before we share them, so it's good to see any sort of feedback on that. So with that, I will see you on Thursday.